Democracy has all sorts of checks and balances to help make sure that elected officials don't get carried away with the responsibilities and authority that they have. And the TDG has its own. One is a consultative culture. I think that'll keep a lot of elected officials from getting themselves into trouble or making too many bad decisions. The other one is what I'm going to call the advisory board of the TDG. And before I start talking about the advisory board, I'm just going to go back to our city of 100,000 people that I talked about earlier. And if you remember, the citizens elect the neighborhood representatives, and the neighborhood representatives elect the district representatives, and the district representatives elect the quadrant representatives, and then the quadrant representatives elects the highest tier, and the highest tier is the one that's got all the authority, or the authority within the TDG of this particular municipal district. Okay, and so that's how this is what's called the elected arm of the TDG. This is all elections. It's going from the bottom and up to the top. Now, when I talk about the advisory board, is that what's going to happen there is we're going to appoint advisors. The highest tier is going to appoint. Now, the highest tier, which has the authority within this municipal TDG, is going to appoint advisors to its advisory board. And this is going to be appointment. It's going to be appointment for about 3 years, I would say, maybe 2, maybe 4, somewhere around there. And so that the term of office will be a little bit longer. And who's it going to appoint? Well, hopefully someone that has got experience on the elected side of the TDG. So it may appoint a member from itself into the advisory board. It may appoint someone from these levels here into the advisory board, or it may appoint someone who used to be elected and serving on one of these levels, and for whatever reason is no longer serving. They may be a very good asset to have on the advisory board as well too. Or it may even appoint, I'm going to come back into this later, a secondary arm of the advisory board, which I'll talk about later. But the highest tier is going to decide which people are going to be appointed. Now, once a person has been appointed to the advisory board, is they can no longer serve on the elected side. So they have to, if they are both elected and then are appointed, they have to decide which side are they going to stay on. Do they want to stay in elected, or do they want to stay in appointed? And they make that decision. They say, this is where I want to be, and that's what they're going to do. So they're going to appoint that. Now this advisory board is probably going to create a sub-board, and I'll get into that a little bit later on here, a lower level advisory board. Okay, so they're going to do the same things to do their second level advisory board, is that they're going to be, again, hopefully picking people who are serving or who have served on the elected side of the TDG into this board. And as this appointed side of the TDG is discussing its resources and what it has to do, they're going to be assigning responsibilities to each of the members. The advisory board members, they're going to be working together. They're going to have their own little meetings, and they're going to say, well, who's going to advise who and what. And for example, it might be decided that the advisory board here at this level, at the higher level, they're going to go back and give advice to the highest tier, or they may also go into the quadrant. So once you're appointed to an advisory board, is that the advisory board has the right to come into any elected side meetings and to monitor and see what's happening and give them some feedback onto what they are doing. Okay, and again, the second level advisory board, they might decide that they're going to work at the district and neighborhood level, and they're also going to be talking to the citizens as well too. Okay, so these people, they didn't get appointed for no reason at all. And this top advisory board appoints the people to the second level. And again, we'll be hopefully drawing from someone who's had experience on the elected side. And these two boards, they will be meeting amongst themselves, and they'll be signing responsibilities, and they will be determining who's going to meet with which elected bodies. For example, in this particular TDG, the advisory board, the higher level advisory boards, they meet with the highest tier and the quadrant tier. And the second level, they meet with the district, neighborhood, and the citizens. And they have a right to attend any meeting of the elected side of the TDG if they so choose. And they can offer their guidance and their experience. It is important to note that the advisors, when they do meet with the elected side of the TDG, is that they have no vote at all in the decision-making process. The elected bodies are required to listen, and because the advisors have a lot of trust and experience and respect, they will be listened to, but the elected bodies are not obligated to take any advice that the advisors give. It is just to give the elected bodies a second perspective on whatever they're dealing with. For example, if an elected body has trouble coming to some kind of consensus decision on a particular issue, the advisor may be able to help the elected bodies out in that regard. Are the elected bodies behaving in a consultative mindset? Are they taking in all the aspects of all the participants that are participating? And so the advisors can be quite good at that. Another thing that the advisors could do too is that if a citizen has trouble with some of the decisions that are coming from the elected bodies and they're not happy with that, they can take their complaints to the advisor, and the advisor could do an investigation and he could go back to the elected bodies and say, did you guys really consider these guys' opinions and perspectives on this issue? And if the elected body explains that they did, and they did consider that and looked at the pros and cons of everything, and they says that the best thing for society is that, yeah, maybe the citizen doesn't get his way, but that's the citizen's complaint has been legitimately heard and it was dealt with, and that might be satisfying for the citizen just to know that his perspectives were being discussed somewhere in the elected body's deliberations. Another thing that the advisors can do is they may be in charge of monitoring the elections. As because they are an appointed body, they really can't be fired, and they're the ones that can say, hey, we got to get these elections going well within the TDG, and just making sure that the votes are counted properly, that the voting is done according to the constitution of the TDG, and making sure that the electoral processes are working properly. Another advantage of the advisors is because the advisors will be meeting different parts of the TDG. So they, like this particular advisor, they may be meeting with that district over there, and they might be also meeting with that district over there, is that they're going to have a pretty good handle on what the whole TDG is operating on. And so they may be a source of knowledge to see how the whole TDG is functioning, and when they bring that perspective into the elected body's decision making, things might change a little bit. And I think that sort of brings up to my next point, is that sometimes people get into a bit of a rut into their thinking, into the deliberations, and just having that fresh voice in there and just kind of looking at things at a little bit different angle, the advisors could bring that and that would allow the elected bodies to come to some kind of really, really unique decision and come to a better decision than they would have without the advisor. But again, is that the advisors really cannot have any influence on the final decision of elected bodies. They can just only advise, and the elected bodies are not obligated to take the advice. Now, you will notice here that what is really neat about this diagram is that we've got a really cool circle happening here. Okay? The citizens elect the neighborhood representatives elect the district representatives, the district representatives elect the quadrant representatives, the quadrant representatives elect the highest tier, who then appoint the advisory board, and these people appoint the second level advisory board, and then we get that connection back to the citizens. So I find it kind of interesting is that our vote at the neighborhood level for our neighborhood representatives is somehow going to influence that the advisor that comes and advises us, 4 or 5 or 6 years down the road. I think that's kind of neat.